The sound of forced laughter echoed through Grandpa Harold's sprawling Victorian mansion as I adjusted the collar of my navy dress, watching my husband David's jaw tighten with each passing minute. We'd been at his grandfather's 90th birthday celebration for barely an hour, but something felt fundamentally wrong. It wasn't just the usual family dysfunction that plagued the Whitmore gatherings. This was different. Darker. The kind of wrongness that makes your skin crawl and your instincts scream danger. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. We are leaving. Something is very, very wrong, David whispered urgently in my ear, his hand gripping my elbow with surprising force. His face had gone pale, and I could see a thin sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the October chill seeping through the old windows. What are you talking about? I whispered back, glancing around the crowded living room where 3 generations of Whitmores mingled with champagne glasses and forced smiles. We just got here. Your grandfather specifically asked us to come early for the family photos. David's eyes darted toward the kitchen where his grandfather sat in his wheelchair, surrounded by his 4 children and their spouses. At 90, Harold Whitmore was still sharp as a tack, his steel-gray eyes missing nothing as he held court from his position at the head of the antique dining table. The birthday cake, an elaborate 3-tiered creation with 90 blazing in gold candles, sat untouched beside him. Sarah, listen to me very carefully. David's voice was barely audible, his lips barely moving as he pretended to adjust his tie. Don't look directly at anyone. Don't react to what I'm about to tell you. But we need to leave. Now. My heart began to race. In 15 years of marriage, I'd never seen David like this. My husband was the calmest person I knew, a trauma surgeon who could operate on a child's heart without breaking a sweat. Whatever had spooked him was serious. David, you're scaring me, I murmured, taking a sip of champagne to appear casual while my mind raced through possibilities. What's wrong? He guided me toward the bay window overlooking the garden, positioning us so we could see the room while appearing to admire the autumn foliage outside. Do you remember what Grandpa Harold did for a living? Real estate development, I replied automatically. He built half the commercial district downtown. David, what does this have to do with? That's what we were told, he interrupted, his voice tight with barely controlled tension. But I just overheard Uncle Marcus talking to Aunt Evelyn in the study. Sarah, my grandfather wasn't in real estate. He was a money launderer for the mob. The champagne glass nearly slipped from my fingers. What? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Keep your voice down, David hissed, his smile never wavering as his cousin Jennifer approached us with her husband Tom. David. Sarah. Jennifer's voice was honey-sweet, but her eyes held the same strange tension I was beginning to notice in everyone at this party. Having a good time? Isn't it wonderful how the whole family could be here for Grandpa's big day? Absolutely, I managed, forcing enthusiasm into my voice while my mind reeled. He looks amazing for 90. Oh, he's always been tough as nails, Tom added, his laugh sounding forced. Nothing keeps Harold Whitmore down. Nothing at all. There was something in the way he said it, an emphasis that felt like a threat rather than admiration. Jennifer's smile grew wider, but it never reached her eyes. We should probably join the group for the toast, Jennifer suggested, though it sounded more like a command. Uncle Marcus is about to give a speech about Grandpa's legacy. David's hand found mine, squeezing so hard I almost winced. Of course, he said smoothly. We wouldn't miss it. As Jennifer and Tom moved away, David leaned closer to me. When Uncle Marcus starts his speech, we're going to slip out through the back door. Don't say goodbye to anyone. Just follow my lead. David. I don't understand, the real estate company was a front, he whispered urgently. For 60 years, Grandpa Harold has been washing money for the Torino crime family. Every building, every development, every legitimate business, it was all built on blood money. My legs felt weak. Harold Whitmore, the kind grandfather who'd taught David to fish, who'd bounced my children on his knee at Christmas, who'd walked me down the aisle when my own father couldn't make it from Scotland, that man was a criminal. But why would Uncle Marcus be talking about it openly? I whispered back. David's expression grew even grimmer. Because Grandpa Harold is dying, Sarah. The cancer diagnosis he got last month? It's terminal. He has maybe 2 weeks left. I know. And the FBI has been closing in on the operation for 3 years, David continued, his words coming faster now. Marcus said they're planning to flip him. Get him to testify against the Torinos in exchange for immunity for the family. The room suddenly felt smaller, the laughter louder and more sinister. I looked around with new eyes, seeing the expensive suits, the designer jewelry, the casual wealth that had always seemed normal for the Whitmore family gatherings. All of it built on crime. So what's the problem? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would be terrible. The problem, David said, watching as his Uncle Marcus clinked a knife against his glass to call for attention, is that Grandpa Harold told them no. He's not going to testify. He's taking their secrets to his grave. The room began to quiet as Marcus cleared his throat, preparing to speak. But David wasn't finished with his revelation. And Marcus just told Evelyn that the Torinos aren't going to let that happen. They can't risk Harold taking what he knows about their operation to his grave. So they're going to make sure he talks before he dies. How? I whispered, though I was beginning to suspect the horrible truth. David's eyes met mine, and I saw fear there that chilled me to the bone. They're going to torture it out of him. Tonight. Here. In front of the whole family, to make sure no one else ever thinks about staying quiet. The blood drained from my face as the implications hit me. And we're witnesses they can't afford to leave alive if we try to leave now, David finished. The whole family is here because they're all complicit. Everyone except us. We're the only ones who didn't know. Marcus's voice boomed across the room. Family. Friends. If I could have your attention, please. Tonight, we celebrate not just my father's 90th birthday, but a lifetime of loyalty, sacrifice, and keeping the family together through good times and bad. The applause that followed sounded like thunder in my ears. I looked around the room with new understanding, seeing how everyone's smiles looked painted on, how their eyes held knowledge I'd been blind to for 15 years. But most importantly, Marcus continued, his gaze sweeping across the room before landing directly on David and me, we celebrate the bonds that tie us together. The bonds that ensure that family secrets stay in the family. Forever. David's grip on my hand tightened. Sarah, when I create a distraction, you run. Get to the car and drive to the police station. Don't look back. I'm not leaving you, you have to. Someone needs to survive this to tell the truth. Someone needs to make sure our kids know what really happened to their parents. My blood turned to ice water. Our children, Emma and Jake, were at my sister's house for the weekend. Safe. At least they were safe. Now, Marcus continued, his voice taking on a darker tone, I know some of you might be wondering about recent developments. About certain federal interests in our family business. I want to assure everyone that we have the situation well in hand. He gestured toward 2 men I hadn't noticed before, standing by the French doors leading to the patio. They weren't family. They were too alert, too watchful, and there was something about the way they carried themselves that screamed violence. Tonight, Marcus said, his smile never wavering, we're going to resolve all our outstanding issues. As a family. The way we always have. Harold Whitmore, the birthday boy himself, hadn't said a word during his son's speech. He sat in his wheelchair, staring at his hands, looking every one of his 90 years. When he finally raised his head, his eyes found David's. Across the room, the look that passed between them lasted only a second, but it was enough. Harold knew what was coming. And he was trying to warn us. Dad. David called out, his voice carefully controlled. Maybe Grandpa would like to say a few words? It is his party, after all. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and I caught the slightest shake of his head toward the men by the doors. Harold Whitmore slowly wheeled himself forward, the squeaking of his chair's wheels the only sound in the suddenly tense room. When he reached the center of the space, he looked up at all of us, his children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and the handful of family friends who'd been invited to what I now realized was going to be his final performance. 90 years, he said, his voice still strong despite his frail body. 90 years I've kept my mouth shut. 90 years I've protected this family. 90 years I've carried secrets that could destroy powerful men. Marcus stepped forward. Dad, maybe we should. I'm not finished, Harold snapped, and for a moment, I saw the steel that had allowed him to survive 9 decades in a world where weakness meant death. I want to tell you all a story. About choices. About loyalty. About what happens when you make a deal with the devil and spend your whole life paying the price. David's hand found the small of my back, guiding me slowly toward the back of the room. No one was paying attention to us, all eyes were on the old man in the wheelchair. You see, Harold continued, I learned something very important when I was a young man. I learned that some secrets are worth dying for. And some secrets, well, some secrets are worth killing for. His eyes swept the room, landing on each family member in turn. When his gaze reached the 2 strangers by the door, his expression hardened. The question is, he said, his voice growing stronger with each word, which kind of secret do you think I've been keeping? That's when the lights went out, the mansion plunged into complete darkness, and chaos erupted instantly. Women screamed. Men shouted, glass shattered as someone knocked over a table. In the darkness, I heard Harold's voice, strong and clear, David. Now. My husband grabbed my hand and pulled me toward where I remembered the back door being. Behind us, flashlight beams cut through the darkness as the 2 strangers tried to regain control of the situation. This way, David whispered urgently, guiding me through the maze of furniture by memory. The kitchen door leads to the service porch. We stumbled through the darkness, my heels catching on the Persian rug as David pulled me forward. Behind us, I could hear Marcus shouting orders, his carefully controlled demeanor finally cracking. Find them. Don't let them leave. The kitchen door was locked, David cursed under his breath, feeling along the doorframe for the key that his grandmother had always kept hidden there. Come on, footsteps thundered across the wooden floors behind us. Flashlight beams swept the kitchen, growing closer. Got it, David breathed, finding the key and jamming it into the lock. The door swung open just as the kitchen lights blazed back to life. We dove through the doorway onto the service porch as shouts erupted behind us. There! By the back door! We ran across the backyard in the darkness, David leading me toward the gate that opened onto the alley where we'd parked. Behind us, the mansion blazed with light as the family and their guests poured out in pursuit. The car keys, I gasped as we reached our Honda. David, do you have? He was already pulling them from his pocket, his hands shaking as he tried to unlock the door. Get in, get in. The engine turned over just as figures appeared at the mouth of the alley. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of Marcus's face, twisted with rage, before David floored the accelerator and we shot out onto the street. Where are we going? I asked, checking the side mirror for signs of pursuit. Police station. David replied grimly, taking a hard right turn that threw me against the passenger door. We need to tell them what we heard. What we saw. Will they believe us? David's laugh was hollow. A respected family of real estate developers being accused of money laundering by their own grandson? Probably not. But it's better than being dead. We drove in silence for several minutes, the familiar streets of our hometown looking alien and threatening in the darkness. Every car behind us could be following us. Every shadow could hide an enemy. David, I said finally, your grandfather. Do you think he's? He knew this was coming, David replied, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The power outage wasn't an accident. He had an escape plan. The question is whether he'll use it to run or to fight. As if in answer to his words, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. David glanced at it as I read aloud, the safety deposit box. First National. Box 1247. Password is Emma's birthday. Tell them everything. We stared at each other in the dim light of the dashboard. Harold Whitmore, the mobster's money launderer, had just given us the key to bringing down a criminal empire that had operated in our town for 60 years. Sarah, David said quietly, I don't think we're just running from my family anymore. I think we're about to become the most wanted people in the state. In the distance, sirens began to wail. But I couldn't tell if they were coming to help us or hunt us. The real nightmare was just beginning. The First National Bank stood like a fortress in the pre-dawn darkness, its imposing granite facade offering no comfort as David and I sat in our car across the street, waiting for 9 a.m. opening. We'd spent the night in a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town, nursing coffee and jumping at every sound, afraid to go home, afraid to sleep, afraid to trust anyone. My phone had been buzzing non-stop since we fled the mansion. 17 missed calls from Marcus. 12 from David's mother, Patricia. 8 from his sister Caroline. The voicemails grew increasingly frantic, then angry, then threatening. David, honey, there's been a terrible misunderstanding, Patricia's voice had pleaded in the first message. Come home. We need to talk as a family. By the 5th message, her tone had changed completely. You have no idea what you're interfering with. Come back now, or you'll destroy everything your grandfather built. The final message, left at 3 a.m., was from Marcus himself. You have something that belongs to the family. Return it, and we can forget this ever happened. Keep running, and you'll discover that the Whitmore name reaches further than you ever imagined. They know about the safety deposit box, I said, watching early morning joggers begin to populate the sidewalks. How is that possible? David stared at the bank's entrance, his jaw set with determination that reminded me of his grandfather. Because Harold's been planning this for years. The text wasn't random, Sarah. He's been preparing for the day when everything would come crashing down. At exactly 9 a.m., we watched the bank manager, a thin man in an expensive suit, unlock the front doors. David checked our surroundings one more time before we crossed the street, moving quickly but trying not to appear suspicious. The bank's interior was all polished marble and hushed voices, the kind of establishment that had been serving the wealthy families of our town for over a century. I wondered how many of those families had secrets as dark as the Whitmores. We need to access a safety deposit box, David told the woman at the customer service desk, a pleasant middle-aged blonde whose name tag read Linda. Of course, Linda smiled warmly. Do you have the box number and authorization? Box 1247, David replied, sliding Harold's bank card across the desk. I'm David Whitmore, Harold Whitmore's grandson. Linda's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Mr. Whitmore. Your grandfather left specific instructions regarding this box. Please wait here. She disappeared into a back office, leaving us standing in the marble lobby feeling exposed and vulnerable. Through the tall windows, I could see our car in the parking lot, but I also noticed a black SUV that hadn't been there when we arrived. David, I whispered, nodding toward the window. He followed my gaze and cursed under his breath. We need to hurry. Linda returned with a stern-looking man in his 60s who introduced himself as Mr. Carlyle, the bank president. Mr. Whitmore, he said formally, your grandfather was very clear about the circumstances under which this box could be accessed. He said you would come here only if the wolves were at the door. Is that the case? David and I exchanged glances. Yes, David replied. The wolves are definitely at the door. Carlyle nodded grimly. Then please follow me. And Mr. Whitmore? Your grandfather also said to tell you that he's proud of the man you've become, and that he's sorry for the legacy he's leaving behind. We followed Carlyle down a corridor lined with portraits of the bank's founding fathers, men who'd built their fortunes in an era when asking too many questions about the source of wealth was considered impolite. At the end of the hall, a heavy steel door led to the vault area. The safety deposit box room was smaller than I'd expected, lined with hundreds of metal compartments of various sizes. Carlyle led us to box 1247, which was larger than most, and inserted his key into one of the two locks. Your turn, he said to David. David inserted Harold's key and turned it. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo through the small room like a gunshot. Inside the box was a thick manila envelope, several smaller envelopes bound with rubber bands, and something that made my blood run cold, a loaded revolver. Mr. Carlyle, I said carefully, did you know what was in here? The bank president's expression was grim. Your grandfather has been a client of this institution for 60 years, Mrs. Whitmore. We've learned not to ask questions that we don't want answered. David lifted out the manila envelope first. It was heavy, stuffed with documents, photographs, and what appeared to be audio cassettes. On the front, in Harold's shaky handwriting, was a single word, insurance. The smaller envelopes were labeled with dates going back decades, each one containing what looked like financial records, correspondence, and photographs. The most recent envelope was dated just 2 weeks ago, shortly after Harold's cancer diagnosis. There's a note, David said, pulling out a single sheet of paper from the manila envelope. I read over his shoulder as he unfolded it. David, if you're Reading this, then the day I've been dreading for 60 years has finally arrived. The chickens, as they say, have come home to roost. I need you to understand something before you judge me too harshly. I never chose this life. It chose me. In 1963, I was a young man trying to build a construction business to support your grandmother and our newborn son. The Torino family approached me with an offer I couldn't refuse, literally. Work with them, or watch my family disappear. For 60 years, I've laundered their money through real estate developments, shell companies, and legitimate businesses. Every shopping center, every office building, every apartment complex that bears the Whitmore name was built with blood money. The fortune that put your father through medical school, that paid for your education, that gave our family comfort and security, all of it is dirty, but I never forgot what they were. I never stopped documenting their crimes. Every transaction, every murder, every corrupt official they bought, I recorded it all. The contents of this box represent 60 years of evidence that could destroy the Torino crime family and everyone who worked with them. The FBI has been closing in for 3 years. Agent Rebecca Martinez has been leading the investigation. She can be trusted. Give her everything in this box, but David, you need to understand, once you open this door, you can never close it again. The Torinos won't just come after you, they'll come after Sarah, after Emma and Jake. They'll use every resource, every connection, every corrupt official in their network to silence you. I'm an old man dying of cancer. I have nothing left to lose. You have everything. The choice is yours. If you decide to walk away, take the money from envelope marked escape fund and disappear. New identities are in envelope marked emergency. The children's college funds are clean. I made sure of that years ago. If you decide to fight, know that you're not fighting alone. There are others, FBI agents, prosecutors, honest cops who've been waiting for this moment. The evidence in this box will bring down not just the Torinos, but a network of corruption that reaches into every level of government in this state. Whatever you choose, I love you. I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry, Grandpa Harold P.S. Marcus knows about this box. He'll come for it. The gun is loaded. Use it if you have to. My hands were shaking as I finished reading. David, this is insane. We're talking about taking on the mob. We're talking about doing what's right, David replied, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Mr. Carlyle cleared his throat. Mr. Whitmore, I should mention that your Uncle Marcus called this morning asking about your grandfather's accounts. I told him that banking information is confidential, but what? David asked sharply. But he mentioned that he has friends on the bank's board of directors. Friends who might be interested in reviewing our confidentiality policies. The implication was clear. Marcus had the connections to force the bank to reveal what we'd accessed. We were running out of time. David began stuffing the envelopes into a canvas bag Mr. Carlyle had provided. Sarah, call Agent Martinez. Her number should be in here somewhere. I was rifling through the documents when I found it, a business card for FBI Special Agent Rebecca Martinez, with a handwritten note on the back. Tell her, the Eagle has landed. She'll know what it means. As I dialed the number, David discovered something else in the box that made him gasp, a thick envelope labeled, the Judas list. What is it? I whispered, waiting for the FBI agent to answer. David opened the envelope and pulled out a typed list of names. Names I recognized. The mayor. The police chief. 3 city council members. A federal judge. 2 state senators. Sarah. David breathed, half the government is on the Torino payroll. That's when Agent Martinez answered the phone. Martinez. Agent Martinez, this is Sarah Whitmore. Harold Whitmore's granddaughter-in-law. I need to tell you that the Eagle has landed. The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Finally, Martinez spoke, her voice tight with excitement and fear. Where are you right now? First National Bank. We have Harold's insurance. Jesus Christ, Martinez muttered. Listen to me very carefully. Do not leave that bank. Do not trust anyone in local law enforcement. I'm sending a federal tactical team to escort you to a secure location. How long ago did you access the box? I checked my watch. About 20 minutes. Then they already know. The bank's security system sends automatic alerts when certain boxes are accessed. Box 1247 has been flagged in our system for 3 years. My blood ran cold. Agent Martinez, if the bank system is monitored, then every corrupt official on that list knows you have the evidence, she finished. And they're probably on their way to stop you from leaving with it. Through the bank's windows, I could see that the black SUV had been joined by 2 more vehicles. Men in suits were getting out, trying to look casual but clearly positioning themselves around the building. David, I whispered urgently, we're surrounded. Mr. Carlyle, who had been pretending not to listen to our conversation, suddenly looked terrified. Mr. Whitmore, there's something I need to tell you. When your uncle called this morning, he wasn't asking about your accounts. He was asking about the building's layout. Emergency exits. Security protocols. The bank's fire alarm suddenly began blaring. That's not a drill, Martinez's voice crackled through my phone. They're going to force an evacuation, then grab you in the confusion. Is there another way out of that building? Mr. Carlyle was already moving. The old tunnel system. During Prohibition, this building was connected to the courthouse and the mayor's office by underground passages. They're still intact. As we followed him toward a hidden door behind a false wall, David grabbed the loaded revolver from the safety deposit box. Sarah, whatever happens next, remember that our kids are safe. Focus on that. The tunnel was narrow, dusty, and pitch black except for Mr. Carlyle's flashlight. As we hurried through the underground passage, I could hear the muffled sounds of commotion above us, shouts, footsteps, what sounded like doors being kicked in. Where does this come out? David asked, the canvas bag of evidence clutched tightly against his chest. The basement of the old courthouse, Carlyle replied. But Mr. Whitmore, you should know, your grandfather wasn't the only one who used these tunnels over the years. The Torinos know about them too. As if on cue, we heard footsteps echoing behind us in the darkness. Multiple sets of footsteps, moving fast. Run, David said simply. We ran through the musty tunnel, our footsteps echoing off the brick walls, the sound of pursuit growing closer behind us. Ahead, I could see a faint light that must be the courthouse basement. That's when the first gunshot rang out. The bullet ricocheted off the tunnel wall inches from my head, sending brick fragments flying. David shoved me forward as more shots followed, the muzzle flashes lighting up the tunnel like deadly fireworks. The stairs. Carlyle shouted, pointing toward a metal staircase leading up to street level. We burst out of the tunnel into the courthouse basement just as our pursuers rounded the corner behind us. David turned and fired 3 shots back down the stairwell, buying us precious seconds. The courthouse basement was a maze of storage rooms and administrative offices. We followed Carlyle through the labyrinth, the sounds of pursuit echoing from multiple directions now. They had surrounded the building too. There, Carlyle pointed to a service elevator. It goes directly to the parking garage. My car is in space B7. As the elevator doors closed, I caught a glimpse of Marcus Whitmore emerging from the tunnel entrance, his face twisted with rage and desperation. Our eyes met for a split second before the doors shut, and I saw something in his expression that chilled me more than the gunshots, the look of a man who had nothing left to lose. Agent Martinez, I gasped into the phone, we're in the courthouse parking garage. Where's your tactical team? 3 minutes out, she replied. Can you hold position? The elevator doors opened to reveal the parking garage, and immediately we knew the answer to her question. The garage was full of men in suits, all carrying weapons, all positioned to cut off any escape route. Standing in the center of the garage, leaning casually against a black Mercedes, was a man I'd never seen before but somehow recognized from David's descriptions, Vincent Torino himself, the head of the crime family that had owned Harold Whitmore for 60 years. He was smaller than I'd expected, an elderly man in an expensive suit who looked more like a retired accountant than a mob boss. But his eyes held the kind of cold calculation that comes from decades of violence. David, he called out, his voice echoing through the concrete space. I think it's time we had a conversation about your grandfather's collection. Behind us, the elevator chimed as more armed men arrived from the courthouse. We were trapped, but that's when I heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the wail of federal sirens, growing louder by the second. Vincent Torino's calm expression flickered for the first time. The cavalry was coming. The federal sirens grew louder, echoing through the concrete parking garage like the sound of approaching salvation. But Vincent Torino didn't look worried. If anything, his thin smile grew wider as he straightened his tie and adjusted his gold cufflinks. "Mr. Whitmore," he said conversationally, as if we were discussing the weather rather than staring down the barrels of a dozen guns, "I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about how things work in this town." David kept the revolver trained on Torino, though we both knew it was a futile gesture. We were outnumbered 12-1, trapped in a concrete box with nowhere to run. The canvas bag containing 60 years of evidence felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in my arms. "The only misunderstanding," David replied, his voice steady despite our desperate situation, "is thinking we'd be intimidated by a dying old man and his hired thugs." Torino's laugh was soft, almost grandfatherly. "Dying? Oh, my dear boy, I'm not the one who's dying here. Your grandfather is dying. And in about 30 seconds, when those federal agents arrive, you're going to discover something very interesting about the reach of my organization." The sirens were close now, maybe a block away. Through the garage's open entrance, I could see flashing lights painting the morning sky red and blue. Help was coming. It had to be enough. "You see," Torino continued, checking his expensive watch, "Agent Martinez is a dedicated professional. Very by the book. The problem with being by the book is that you follow protocols. And protocols can be manipulated." My phone, still connected to Agent Martinez, crackled with static. Her voice came through broken and urgent. "Sarah, can you, heavy interference, not safe." The line went dead. David's jaw tightened. "What did you do?" "Nothing permanent," Torino assured us. "Agent Martinez and her team are currently dealing with a high-priority terrorism threat at the federal building. Anonymous tip about a bomb. Very credible source. They'll be busy for hours." The sound of approaching vehicles grew louder, and my heart leaped with hope until I saw what was actually arriving. Not federal agents in unmarked cars, but local police cruisers. Officers I recognized from community events, from the grocery store, from Emma's school functions, officers whose names were probably on Harold's Judas list. "Ah," Torino said with satisfaction as the police cars filled the garage entrance, "right on time." Police Chief Robert Hayes emerged from the lead vehicle, a man I'd known for 15 years, whose daughter had been in Emma's Girl Scout troop. He walked toward us with his hand resting casually on his service weapon, his face a mask of professional concern. "David, Sarah," he called out, "we got reports of shots fired. Are you folks all right?" The surreal nature of the situation hit me like a physical blow. Here was a man who'd barbecued at our 4th of July parties, who'd coached Little League with David, who'd seemed like the epitome of small-town integrity. And he was asking if we were all right while standing next to the mob boss who'd just threatened to kill us. "Chief Hayes," I said carefully, "I think there's been some confusion. These men are holding us at gunpoint." Hayes looked around the garage with exaggerated surprise, as if noticing the armed men for the first time. "I don't see any weapons, Sarah. Are you feeling all right? You look a little stressed." Behind Hayes, I recognized Officer Mike Patterson, Detective Julia Santos, Sergeant Tom Bradley, all of them people I'd trusted, people who'd been part of our community for years. All of them now revealed as corruption. "The bag, Sarah," Torino said gently. "Just hand over the bag, and this can all be resolved peacefully. Your children are safe at your sister's house. It would be a shame if that had to change." The threat against Emma and Jake sent ice through my veins. David noticed my reaction and stepped protectively closer. "Don't," he warned Torino. "Don't even think about it." "I'm not thinking about anything, Mr. Whitmore. I'm simply pointing out that everyone in this garage wants the same thing, for this situation to end without unnecessary violence. Your grandfather understood this. He knew that some fights can't be won, only survived." Chief Hayes stepped forward. "David, I'm going to need you to put that weapon down. We can't have civilians firing guns in a public building." "Civilians?" David's voice rose with anger. "Bob, you've known me since I was 12 years old. You know I'm not the threat here." "All I know," Hayes replied with bureaucratic precision, "is that we have reports of an armed man making threats in a courthouse parking garage. I need you to comply with my instructions." The choreography was perfect. Every word, every gesture designed to create a legal justification for whatever came next. If we ended up dead, it would be because we'd resisted arrest, threatened officers, posed a danger to public safety. That's when Mr. Carlyle, who'd been silent since we'd escaped the bank, did something unexpected. He stepped forward, placing himself between us and the corrupt officers. "Chief Hayes," he said formally, "I'm William Carlyle, president of First National Bank. These people are under the protection of federal banking regulations. Any interference with their legitimate access to safety deposit box contents constitutes a federal crime." Hayes's expression flickered with uncertainty. "Mr. Carlyle, with all due respect, this is a local police matter." "No," Carlyle replied firmly, "it's not. Mrs. Whitmore, would you please show Chief Hayes the federal banking authorization in your bag?" I had no idea what he was talking about, but I trusted that this man who'd helped us escape had a plan. I opened the canvas bag and found what he meant, a official-looking document with federal seals and signatures. "This authorization," Carlyle continued, "grants Mrs. Whitmore federal witness protection status in connection with an ongoing FBI investigation. Any interference with her person or the evidence she's carrying is a violation of federal statute. 18 U.S.C. 1512. The document looked real enough that Hayes hesitated. In that moment of uncertainty, Vincent Torino's calm facade finally cracked. "Enough of this theater," he snapped. "Hayes, do your job." The mask had slipped. The polite old gentleman was gone, replaced by the cold killer who'd built an empire on fear and violence. Chief Hayes's face went pale as he realized his cover was blown in front of witnesses. "Mr. Torino," Hayes said carefully, maybe you should remember who pays your mortgage," Torino interrupted. "And who knows about your gambling debts? And who has photos of you with that 19-year-old casino dealer in Atlantic City?" The corruption was unraveling in real time. Hayes looked around desperately, realizing that his carefully constructed double life was collapsing. The other officers shifted uncomfortably, understanding that they were all now witnesses to something that couldn't be taken back. That's when we heard the sound that changed everything, the distinctive roar of helicopters. Approaching fast, Torino looked up with genuine surprise for the first time. What the hell? The helicopters were military, not police. Black Hawks with federal markings, coming in low and fast. Through the garage entrance, I could see vehicles racing toward us, real federal agents this time, in tactical gear, with weapons designed for war rather than intimidation. "Agent Martinez," a voice boomed through a loudspeaker, "FBI. This facility is surrounded. All personnel lay down your weapons immediately." But Vincent Torino wasn't finished. With the calm precision of a man who'd survived 70 years in a violent business, he pulled a small pistol from his jacket and pointed it directly at my head. "Mr. Whitmore," he said conversationally, "your grandfather was a smart man. He knew that some battles can't be won through force. They can only be won through sacrifice." David raised his revolver, but Torino shook his head. "I wouldn't. Not unless you want your wife's brains decorating this concrete wall." The federal agents were rappelling from the helicopters now, surrounding the garage with military precision. But they couldn't act as long as Torino held his gun to my head. "Here's what's going to happen," Torino announced, his voice carrying clearly through the garage. "Mrs. Whitmore is going to hand me that bag. Then she and her husband are going to walk away and forget everything they think they learned today. In exchange, they get to see their children grow up." "And if we refuse?" David asked. Torino's smile was genuinely warm, the expression of a loving grandfather. "Then you'll discover that some prices are too high to pay for principle." The federal agents had taken positions around the garage, but their weapons remained lowered. They could see the situation. One wrong move and I'd be dead. That's when Harold Whitmore's voice echoed through the garage. "Vincent, you always were a dramatic son of a bitch." Everyone turned toward the sound. There, being wheeled into the garage by a federal agent, was Harold Whitmore himself. He looked frail and ancient, but his eyes were bright with the intelligence that had kept him alive for 90 years. "Harold," Torino said with genuine surprise, "you're supposed to be dying." "I am dying," Harold replied cheerfully. "Cancer's eating me alive. Got maybe a week left, according to the doctors. Which means I've got nothing left to lose." He gestured to the federal agent pushing his wheelchair. "Vincent, I'd like you to meet Agent Rebecca Martinez. She's been my handler for the past 3 years." The revelation hit like a bomb. Agent Martinez stepped forward, removing her FBI cap, to reveal the graying hair of a woman in her 50s who'd spent decades building cases against organized crime. Vincent Torino, she announced formally, you're under arrest for murder, racketeering, conspiracy, and about 40 other federal charges that should keep you busy until your Harold's age. But Torino still had his gun pressed against my temple. Very touching, Harold. But your handler forgot one thing, I still hold all the cards. No, Harold said sadly, you don't. Agent Martinez, would you please show Mr. Torino what we found in his nephew's car? Martinez held up a cell phone. GPS tracking, Mr. Torino. Your organization has been under complete federal surveillance for 6 months. We have recordings of you ordering murders, photographs of money transfers, video evidence of you corrupting public officials. She gestured toward Chief Hayes and the other officers, who were now being surrounded by federal agents. We know about all of them. The judges, the politicians, the cops on your payroll. It's over. Torino's hand began to shake slightly. You're bluffing. Marcus Whitmore flipped 3 months ago, Harold said gently. He's been wearing a wire to every family meeting, every business discussion, every criminal conspiracy. Including last night's birthday party. The betrayal hit Torino like a physical blow. His own enforcer, Harold's son, had been gathering evidence against him for months. Marcus was never loyal to you, Vincent, Harold continued. He was loyal to his family. And when he realized that you were going to torture an old man to death in front of his grandchildren, he decided that some lines shouldn't be crossed. That's impossible, Torino whispered, but doubt was creeping into his voice. Agent Martinez activated her radio. Bring him in. Marcus Whitmore emerged from behind one of the federal vehicles, flanked by agents. He looked directly at Torino. And I could see years of fear and hatred in his expression. Uncle Vincent, Marcus said formally, I want you to know that every conversation we've had for the past 3 months has been recorded. Every order you gave, every threat you made, every crime you planned, it's all on tape. Torino's gun hand was shaking badly now. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he realized the scope of the betrayal. You little weasel. I made your family. I gave you everything. You enslaved our family, Marcus replied. For 60 years, you held us hostage with threats and violence. Well, the hostage situation is over. But Vincent Torino hadn't survived 7 decades as a crime boss by giving up easily. With the desperate cunning of a cornered animal, he made one final play. Maybe, he said, pressing the gun harder against my head, but Mrs. Whitmore still dies unless I walk out of here. That's when David made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Sarah, he said quietly, I love you. Tell the kids I love them too. Before I could understand what he meant, David dove toward Torino, tackling him around the waist. The gun discharged with a deafening crack that echoed through the concrete garage like thunder, but the bullet missed me. In the chaos that followed, federal agents swarmed Torino and his men. Handcuffs clicked, weapons were secured, and the criminal empire that had controlled our town for 60 years finally collapsed. David lay on the concrete floor, blood pooling around his shoulder where Torino's bullet had grazed him. But he was alive. We were both alive. As Agent Martinez helped me to my feet, I looked around the garage at the dozens of arrests being made. Corrupt cops, dirty politicians, mob enforcers, all of them in federal custody. Is it really over? I asked Harold, who was watching the arrests with satisfaction. The criminal part is over, he replied. But Sarah, you need to understand, what comes next is going to be harder than what you've already been through. What do you mean? Harold's expression grew serious. You've just brought down a criminal network that's been operating for 60 years. The trials will take years. The media attention will be relentless. And there will be others, other crime families, other corrupt officials, who'll want revenge. Agent Martinez approached us, her expression grim. Mrs. Whitmore, we need to discuss witness protection. What you've uncovered here is bigger than just the Torinos. It's connected to organized crime families in 7 states. As they loaded David into an ambulance, he grabbed my hand. Sarah, whatever happens next, remember that we did the right thing. I squeezed his hand, looking around the garage where the most powerful criminal organization in our state's history was being dismantled. I know. But Harold's right, this is just the beginning, isn't it? Through the garage entrance, I could see news vans arriving, reporters setting up cameras. The media circus that would dominate our lives for the foreseeable future, The nightmare at the birthday party was over, but the real fight for justice was just getting started. 2 weeks after the arrests, I sat in a sterile conference room in the federal building, watching my entire life become evidence in the biggest organized crime case in the state's history. David's arm was in a sling, but the doctors said he'd make a full recovery. Emma and Jake were safe in protective custody with my sister in Oregon, though explaining to a 10 and 12-year-old why they couldn't come home was proving harder than facing down Vincent Torino. Agent Martinez spread photographs across the table like a dealer shuffling cards of death. Each image represented a life destroyed by the criminal network we'd helped expose: Sarah Chen in Portland, Amanda Foster in Denver, Lisa Park in Chicago, and dozens more we'd never heard of. 43 murders, Martinez said grimly, spanning 30 years across 7 states. All connected to the Torino organization's money laundering operations. Your grandfather's records are the key to solving cold cases that investigators thought would never be closed. Harold sat beside us in his wheelchair, looking frilier each day as the cancer consumed him. But his mind remained sharp, and his memory of 6 decades of criminal activity was proving invaluable to federal prosecutors. The Torinos didn't just launder money, Harold explained, his voice weaker than it had been at the garage confrontation. They specialized in infiltrating charitable organizations. Nonprofits have less oversight, fewer questions asked about large donations. Perfect for washing dirty money. And when the founders got suspicious? I asked, though I already knew the answer. They eliminated them, Martinez replied. Made it look like accidents, suicides, disappearances. Then they'd install their own people to run the organizations. Over the years, they gained control of dozens of charities, hospitals, even universities. David leaned forward, wincing as his shoulder protested the movement. How did you figure out the pattern? Your grandfather, Martinez said, nodding toward Harold. 3 years ago, he came to us. Said he was tired of being a criminal and wanted to make things right before he died. Harold's laugh turned into a coughing fit that left flecks of blood on his handkerchief. I didn't come to you out of conscience, Agent Martinez. I came because I found out what Vincent was planning for my family. The room fell silent. Martinez and I exchanged glances, understanding that we were about to hear something terrible. Vincent knew I was getting old, that I wouldn't live much longer, Harold continued. He also knew that David was clean, never involved in the business, never compromised. That made David dangerous. A potential witness who couldn't be controlled. So, what was the plan? David asked quietly. Harold's eyes met his grandson's. Vincent was going to have you killed, David. Make it look like a medical malpractice lawsuit gone wrong. You know how many enemies surgeons make. Then he was going to use your death to control Sarah and the children. Grief makes people vulnerable to manipulation. I felt sick. And the birthday party? Was supposed to be your funeral announcement, Harold said. Vincent planned to tell the family that you'd been killed in a car accident on your way to the party. Then he was going to comfort your widow and offer to help manage your affairs. Within a year, Sarah would have been married to one of his associates, and Emma and Jake would have grown up as part of the organization. The casual evil of it took my breath away. Vincent Torino had planned to murder my husband and enslave my children, all while pretending to be a caring family friend. That's when I contacted Agent Martinez, Harold continued. I realized that the only way to protect my family was to destroy the organization that owned us. Martinez pulled out a thick folder. The evidence your grandfather provided led us to similar patterns in other cities. Portland, Denver, Chicago, Atlanta, Phoenix, everywhere the Torinos operated, charitable founders and board members died under suspicious circumstances. How many people are we talking about? I asked. Directly? Over 200 murders spanning 4 decades. Indirectly? Thousands of people who died because medical charities were looted, homeless shelters were bankrupted, children's programs were destroyed. The human cost is incalculable. David studied the photographs of victims. What about the government officials? The judges, politicians, cops who were on their payroll? 97 arrests so far, Martinez replied with satisfaction. Including federal judge Patricia Hawkins, who's been fixing cases for the Torinos for 15 years. She personally ensured that dozens of murder investigations were buried or misdirected. The scope was staggering. An entire shadow government. Of corruption, reaching into every level of law enforcement and the judicial system. There's something else, Martinez said, her expression growing even more serious. Vincent Torino wasn't the head of this organization. He was middle management. Harold nodded grimly. The real power is in New York. The Torino family reports to the Castellano crime syndicate. And they're not happy about losing their West Coast operations. What does that mean for us? I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. It means this is far from over, Martinez replied. We've arrested the local network, but the larger organization is still intact. And they view your family as a threat that needs to be eliminated. As if to emphasize her point, Martinez's phone buzzed with an urgent message. She read it quickly, her face darkening. What is it? David asked. Marcus Whitmore was found dead in his cell this morning. Apparent suicide. The news hit like a physical blow. Marcus, who'd risked everything to bring down the crime family, who'd worn a wire for months to gather evidence, who'd betrayed Vincent Torino to protect his own family, dead. That wasn't suicide, Harold said flatly. Marcus knew too much about the New York connections. They had him killed to prevent him from testifying. How is that possible? I demanded. He was in federal custody, in a secure facility. Martinez's expression was grim. The Castellanos have been operating for over a century, Sarah. They have people everywhere. Guards, administrators, other inmates. Someone got to Marcus. David slammed his good hand on the table. So what's the point? We expose one level of corruption, and there's always another level above it? We'll never be safe, will we? Not as long as you're witnesses, Martinez admitted. But there is another option. She pulled out a new set of documents, witness protection agreements, new identity paperwork, relocation authorizations. Complete witness protection, she explained. New names, new lives, new location. The federal government will relocate your entire family, provide new backgrounds, new jobs. You disappear completely. And give up everything we've built here? I asked. Our careers, our friends, our life? Your life is already over, Harold said bluntly. The moment we opened that safety deposit box, your old life ended. The question now is whether you want to build a new life or have no life at all. I looked around the conference room, thinking about Emma and Jake hiding in Oregon, about David's medical practice that he'd spent 15 years building, about the home we'd worked so hard to create. All of it was gone now, sacrificed on the altar of doing what was right. There's a third option, Martinez said quietly. You could help us finish this. What do you mean? David asked. Your grandfather's evidence is just the beginning. We need someone on the inside, someone the Castellanos don't know is compromised. Someone who could gather intelligence on their New York operations. You want us to go undercover? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not you, Martinez clarified. We want your children. The suggestion was so outrageous that for a moment I thought I'd misheard. You want to use our children as bait? Not bait, Martinez corrected. Assets. Emma and Jake are Harold Whitmore's great-grandchildren. The Castellanos will want to recruit them eventually, bring them into the organization like they did with previous generations. If we can anticipate that recruitment, prepare them for it, absolutely not, David said firmly. We're not turning our children into spies. Harold had been quiet during this exchange, but now he spoke up. David, what do you think happens to Emma and Jake if we don't finish this? They'll spend their entire lives looking over their shoulders, never knowing when the past will catch up with them. And if we do what Agent Martinez suggests? I asked. Then maybe, 20 years from now, when the last of these bastards is dead, or in prison, your children can have normal lives. Martinez leaned forward. We're not talking about putting them in immediate danger. They're 10 and 12, we're talking about a long-term operation. Years of preparation, training, building covers that would position them to infiltrate the organization when they're adults. You're talking about stealing their childhoods, I protested. The Castellanos already stole their childhoods, Harold replied. The moment Vincent Torino decided to murder their father, Emma and Jake stopped being normal kids. Now the question is whether they grow up as victims or as weapons. The moral complexity was staggering. Use our children to destroy the criminal. Organization that threatened them, or hide for the rest of our lives knowing that other families would suffer what we'd suffered. What about you, Harold? David asked his grandfather. What's your recommendation? Harold was quiet for a long moment, staring at the photographs of murder victims spread across the table. I've been a criminal for 60 years, he said finally. I've done terrible things, hurt innocent people, enabled monsters like Vincent Torino. If I could undo any of it, I would. He looked directly at Emma and Jake's school photos that Martinez had included in our file. But I can't undo the past. All I can do is try to ensure that the next generation doesn't inherit the sins of this one. Meaning what? I pressed. Meaning, finish the job, Harold said firmly. Don't just bring down the local operation. Destroy the entire network. Make sure that when Emma and Jake have children of their own, those children won't have to live in fear of men like Vincent Torino. Martinez gathered up the photographs and documents. You don't have to decide today. But understand that every day you wait is another day the Castellanos have to consolidate their power, recruit new people, plan their revenge. As we prepared to leave the conference room, Harold grabbed my hand with surprising strength. Sarah, he said quietly, I need you to understand something. The easy path, witness protection, new identities, hiding for the rest of your lives. That's not really safety. That's just delayed execution. These people don't forget, and they don't forgive. And the hard path? The hard path is dangerous, brutal, and might destroy everything you think you know about right and wrong. But it's the only path that leads to actual freedom. That night, David and I sat in our temporary safe house, watching the news coverage of the ongoing arrests. 47 indictments so far, with more expected daily. The local crime syndicate was completely dismantled, but the reporters were already speculating about connections to larger criminal organizations. What do you think? David asked, his arm still in its sling. I thought about Marcus Whitmore, dead in his cell for doing the right thing. I thought about Sarah Chen, Amanda Foster, Lisa Park, and 40 other women who'd been murdered for threatening criminal profits. I thought about Emma and Jake, somewhere in Oregon, unable to understand why their lives had been turned upside down. I think, I said slowly, that Harold is right. Running away doesn't solve anything. It just makes us victims waiting for the inevitable. David nodded. So we're really going to do this? Turn our children into weapons against organized crime. We're going to give our children the tools they need to finish what their great-grandfather started, I corrected. And maybe, if we're lucky and smart and very, very careful, we can destroy something that's been poisoning our country for a century. The decision was made. But as I would soon learn, deciding to fight monsters and actually fighting them were two very different things, and the monsters we'd exposed so far were nothing compared to what was waiting for us in New York. 6 months later, I stood in a suburban kitchen in Bethesda, Maryland, watching my 12-year-old daughter Emma practice what the FBI called social engineering on an unsuspecting pizza delivery driver. To anyone else, it looked like a normal interaction between a polite child and a young man bringing dinner. But I could see the careful way Emma gathered information, his name, how long he'd worked for the restaurant, whether he had other deliveries in the neighborhood. Thank you, Kevin, Emma said sweetly as she took the pizza boxes. Stay safe out there. It's getting pretty dangerous with all those break-ins in Maple Heights. There had been no break-ins in Maple Heights. Emma was testing whether Kevin would correct false information or simply agree to avoid confrontation. It was a basic intelligence gathering technique that would help her identify reliable sources versus people who would say anything to please authority figures. Kevin nodded nervously. Yeah, my manager warned us about that area. Thanks for the tip, kid. After he left, Emma turned to me with the satisfied expression of a child who'd aced a difficult test. He's reliable, she announced. He corrected me when I said the restaurant was on 5th Street instead of 6th, but he accepted the break-in information without verification. That means he's honest about facts he knows but doesn't fact-check claims from authority figures. My daughter had just profiled a pizza delivery driver like she was preparing for a CIA operation. Because, in a sense, she was. Very good, said Agent Lisa Chen, our handler and the sister of Sarah Chen, the murdered charity founder from Portland. But remember, Emma, real targets won't be as straightforward as Kevin. The people we're preparing you to eventually encounter are trained to lie, trained to manipulate, trained to identify when someone is gathering intelligence. Emma nodded. Seriously. At 12, she'd already learned more about deception, manipulation, and criminal psychology than most adults ever would. The normal childhood I'd wanted to preserve was gone, replaced by a carefully structured program designed to turn my children into the perfect weapons against organized crime. Jake, now 13, was upstairs with David, practicing what the FBI euphemistically called situational awareness. In reality, my 10-year-old son was learning to identify escape routes, spot surveillance, recognize weapons, and assess threats in any environment. Last week, he'd correctly identified 3 undercover federal agents during a routine trip to the mall. How are they adjusting? Agent Chen asked as we moved to the living room of our new identities house. According to our paperwork, we were the Morrison family. David was Dr. Richard Morrison, a cardiac surgeon who'd relocated from Seattle. I was Jennifer Morrison, a former nonprofit administrator now working as a freelance consultant. Emma and Jake were Amy and Justin Morrison, honor students at the local middle school. Their children, I replied, watching through the window as neighborhood kids played soccer in the street, a normal activity that my children could observe but not truly participate in. They miss their real lives, their real friends, their real names. Emma asked me yesterday if she'll ever be Emma Whitmore again, or if she'll be Amy Morrison forever. What did you tell her? I told her the truth. That Emma Whitmore died in that parking garage 6 months ago, and Amy Morrison is who she needs to be now if she wants to survive. Agent Chen made notes in the file she kept on our family's psychological adjustment. Every conversation, every emotion, every sign of stress or adaptation was documented and analyzed. We weren't just witnesses in protection, we were an experiment in creating the perfect undercover operatives. The New York operation is moving faster than we anticipated, Chen said, pulling out satellite photos and surveillance images. 3. More charity foundations have been infiltrated in the past month. The Castellanos are rebuilding their money laundering network after the Torino arrests. The images showed familiar patterns: charitable organizations with new board members who had mysterious backgrounds, sudden influxes of large donations from shell companies, founders who died or disappeared under suspicious circumstances. How many people are dead because we haven't moved fast enough? I asked. 17 confirmed murders in the past 6 months, Chen replied matter-of-factly. But Sarah, you have to understand, this is a 100-year-old criminal organization. They've survived FBI investigations, federal prosecutions, even wars between crime families. What we're attempting has never been done before. David and Jake came downstairs, my son carrying the disassembled components of what looked like a sophisticated electronic device. Bug detector, Jake explained proudly, showing me the circuit board he'd built from scratch. It can identify listening devices, hidden cameras, even GPS trackers. Agent Rodriguez taught me how to make it from parts you can buy at any electronics store. My 13-year-old son was building counterintelligence equipment in his spare time. The normalcy of his pride in this accomplishment was perhaps the most disturbing part of our new reality. How's the shoulder? I asked David, who'd been in physical therapy for months after the shooting. Good enough, he replied, though I could see the stiffness in his movement. Dr. Patel says I'll have full range of motion within a few weeks. Just in time for the next phase. The next phase. For 6 months, we'd been preparing for something the FBI called deep insertion, the process of infiltrating the Castellano organization at the highest levels. It would require David to establish himself as a corrupt surgeon willing to provide medical services to criminals. I would need to build a reputation as a non-profit consultant with flexible ethics. And Emma and Jake would begin the decade-long process of becoming the kind of young people the Castellanos would want to recruit. There's been a development, Agent Chen said, her tone growing more serious. Harold passed away yesterday. The news hit like a physical blow. Harold Whitmore, the complicated man who'd spent 60 years as a criminal and 3 years as an FBI informant, was gone. The last link to our old lives, the man whose courage and cowardice had shaped everything that followed, had died alone in a federal medical facility. How? David asked quietly. The cancer, as expected. But he left something for you. Chen handed David a sealed envelope marked, for my grandson, when the Real work begins. David opened it with shaking hands and read aloud David, if you're reading this, then I'm finally free of the cancer and the guilt that's been eating me alive for decades. I hope you can forgive a dying old man for the burden I've placed on your family. By now, you understand the scope of what we're fighting. The Castellanos aren't just criminals, they're a disease that's been spreading through legitimate institutions for a century. They've corrupted everything they've touched: charities, hospitals, universities, government agencies. They've turned good people into criminals and murdered anyone who couldn't be corrupted. Agent Chen will have told you about the next phase. Let me be clear, what they're asking of you and your family is monstrous. Training children to be spies, turning your marriage into a cover story, spending years building false relationships with dangerous people. It goes against every instinct you have as parents and decent human beings, but I need you to understand something that took me 60 years to learn. Sometimes being a good person requires doing terrible things. The evidence in that safety deposit box was just the beginning. I've been documenting the Castellano organization's crimes for 20 years, long before I contacted the FBI. There are murders going back to the 1950s, corruption schemes involving senators and federal judges, connections to terrorist organizations, and foreign intelligence services. The files are hidden in a place only Emma and Jake can access, because the Castellanos will never suspect children of being operational intelligence assets. When the time comes, Agent Chen will explain how to find them, but David, I need you to make me a promise. If this mission fails, if the FBI operation is compromised, if it becomes clear that the children are in immediate danger, abandon everything and run. Don't let your children pay the price for my sins or the FBI's ambitions. I've arranged for offshore accounts, new identities, safe houses in countries without extradition treaties. Agent Chen doesn't know about them, she can't be allowed to know. The information is in the children's genetic code, encoded in a way that only family DNA can unlock. If the worst happens, remember that survival is more important than justice. The dead can't protect their children. I love you all. I'm sorry for everything, Harold. The letter left us all silent. Even Agent Chen seemed shaken by Harold's final revelation, that he'd prepared escape routes the FBI didn't know about, that he'd literally encoded survival information in his descendants' DNA. What does he mean about genetic encoding? Emma asked. At 12, she was already sophisticated enough to understand most of the letter's implications. Probably biometric locks, Jake suggested. Safes are computers that only open for specific DNA signatures. That's actually really smart, you can't lose genetic code or have it stolen. Agent Chen was forging through her files. This isn't in any of Harold's debriefings. If he had additional evidence, we need to know, David interrupted firmly. Harold was clear. This is our insurance policy, not the FBI's. David, you're talking about withholding evidence in a federal investigation. I'm talking about protecting my children, David replied. Harold spent 60 years being owned by criminals and 3 years being used by federal agents. He understood the difference between cooperation and slavery. The tension in the room was palpable. Agent Chen represented the FBI's interests, destroying the Castellano organization regardless of the cost to our family. Harold's letter had just revealed that he'd never fully trusted that those interests aligned with our survival. There's something else, Chen said reluctantly. The Castellanos have been asking questions about Harold's family. They know Marcus was cooperating with us before his death, and they're trying to identify what evidence might still exist. What kind of questions? I asked. They've been recruiting investigators to look into the Whitmore family genealogy. Background checks on Harold's children and grandchildren. They're trying to map all possible sources of information that could threaten them. Emma and Jake exchanged glances, a look of understanding that passed between them faster than speech. 6 months of training had taught them to think like intelligence operatives, and they'd immediately grasped the implications. They're going to find us eventually, Emma said matter-of-factly. The Morrison identities are good, but they're not perfect. If the Castellanos are systematic about their investigation, they'll identify inconsistencies. Which means we need to accelerate the timeline, Jake added. Instead of waiting years to establish our covers, we need to make contact now, while they're still investigating rather than hunting. Agent Chen stared at my children with a mixture of pride and horror. You're talking about putting yourselves deliberately in the path of people who've murdered 43 people. We're talking about finishing this before more people die, Emma corrected. Every day we wait is another day they have to kill charity workers, corrupt officials, and rebuild their network. I looked at my daughter, my 12-year-old daughter, calmly discussing the tactical advantages of making contact with murderers, and I realized that the children I'd given birth to were already gone. Emma and Jake Whitmore had been replaced by Amy and Justin Morrison, and Amy and Justin Morrison were weapons designed to destroy the people who'd tried to destroy their family. There's a charity gala next month, Agent Sheen said slowly. The Metropolitan Children's Foundation in New York. Several Castellano Front organizations are major donors. It would be a natural place for Dr. Richard Morrison and his nonprofit consultant wife to make an appearance. And they're accomplished children who are interested in charitable work, David added grimly. David, they're 12 and 13, I protested, though I could already see the tactical soundness of the plan. They're the same age Marcus was when Vincent Torino first recruited him, David replied. These people groom children for decades before fully bringing them into the organization. The earlier we make contact, the more natural our eventual infiltration will seem. Agent Chen was taking notes rapidly. We'd need full surveillance, backup teams, extraction protocols if anything goes wrong. What we need, Emma interrupted, is to stop thinking like federal agents and start thinking like the Castellanos. They don't expect to be infiltrated by an entire family working together. They certainly don't expect children to be operational assets. That gives us advantages, Jake continued, but only if we commit completely to the deception. Half measures will get us all killed. I stared at my children, these strangers wearing familiar faces, and made the hardest decision of my life. Okay, I said quietly. We go to New York. We make contact. We finish what Harold started. Agent Chen nodded grimly. Then God help us all. As we began planning for the mission that would either destroy the Castellano crime family or get us all killed, I couldn't help thinking about the pizza delivery driver Kevin, living his normal life in a normal world where children worried about homework and friends rather than survival and revenge. We'd given up everything to bring justice to the people who'd threatened our family. The question now was whether justice was worth the price we were about to pay. In 3 weeks, we would find out. The Metropolitan Children's Foundation Gala was everything I'd expected from New York high society, crystal chandeliers casting warm light over designer gowns, waiters gliding between tables with champagne and canapes, the kind of effortless wealth that came from generations of carefully managed investments. What I hadn't expected was how easily my children would blend into this world of privilege and secrets. Amy Morrison for tonight, wore a navy blue dress that made her look older than her 12 years, her hair styled in a sophisticated updo that framed the intelligence in her eyes. She moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone born to this life, making polite conversation with adults who had no idea they were speaking to a trained intelligence operative. Jake, Justin Morrison, stood near the silent auction display, seemingly absorbed in the art and vacation packages being offered. But I could see the way his eyes tracked movement, catalogued faces, identified the security personnel stationed throughout the ballroom. At 13, my son could spot a concealed weapon from across a crowded room. Dr. Morrison? A voice behind me belonged to an elegant woman in her 60s, her silver hair pulled back in a chignon that spoke of old money and older secrets. I'm Catherine Castellano. I don't believe we've met. My blood turned to ice, but years of medical training had taught David to maintain composure under pressure. Mrs. Castellano, he replied smoothly, extending his hand. Richard Morrison. This is my wife, Jennifer. We're new to the area. I just joined the cardiac surgery team at Presbyterian. Catherine's smile was warm, grandmotherly, the kind of expression that had probably comforted dozens of murder victims in their final moments. How wonderful. We always welcome new families to our community, especially those committed to charitable work. I understand your wife has extensive experience with nonprofit organizations. Some, I replied carefully. I've worked with several foundations over the years, mostly focused on healthcare and children's services. Marvelous. We're always looking for fresh perspectives on our board. Catherine gestured toward a distinguished man in his 70s who was approaching our conversation. Allow me to introduce my husband, Anthony Castellano. Anthony Castellano. The name that had appeared in Harold's files dozens of times, connected to murders, corruption schemes, and criminal enterprises spanning half a century. He looked like what he was, a respectable businessman who'd built an empire through violence and fear. But his eyes held the same calculating intelligence I'd seen in Vincent Torino's gaze. "Dr. Morrison," Anthony said, his handshake firm and appraising. "Catherine mentioned you're from Seattle. Beautiful city. I have some business interests there, mostly real estate development." "Real estate seems to be a lucrative field," David replied, and I caught the subtle emphasis he placed on the word lucrative. Anthony's smile widened almost imperceptibly. "Very lucrative, for those who understand how to navigate the complexities of modern development." The coded language was so subtle that anyone else would have missed it entirely. But we'd been trained to recognize exactly this kind of conversation. The careful probing that criminal organizations use to identify potential recruits. "Dad?" Emma appeared at my elbow, playing her part perfectly. "Sorry to interrupt, but they're starting the program soon." "Of course, sweetheart." I turned to the Castellanos. "This is our daughter, Amy." "Amy, Mr. and Mrs. Castellano." Emma's curtsy was picture perfect, the kind of polite gesture that would immediately mark her as well-bred and properly raised. "It's lovely to meet you. Are you involved with the Children's Foundation?" "We've been supporters for many years," Catherine replied, studying Emma with the keen interest of someone who recognized potential when she saw it. "What grade are you?" "In, dear." "7th," Emma replied. "I'm actually doing a school project on charitable organizations and their impact on communities. It's fascinating how some foundations can change entire neighborhoods, create opportunities where none existed before." The double meaning wasn't lost on Anthony, whose eyes sharpened with interest. "Very perceptive, young lady. Not many children your age understand the broader implications of charitable work." "Amy's always been mature for her age," David said proudly. "Both our children are. They understand that making a real difference sometimes requires unconventional approaches." Jake materialized beside us as if summoned, carrying 2 glasses of sparkling cider. "Sorry I'm late. The auction items are incredible, especially the private art collection tour. Though I noticed some of the pieces have interesting provenance histories." I had to admire my son's subtlety. By mentioning art provenance, he was delicately signaling awareness that some valuable items changed hands through questionable means, exactly the kind of sophisticated understanding that would appeal to people whose business depended on moving stolen goods. Anthony Castellano studied Jake with new interest. "You know about art provenance? That's quite advanced for someone your age." "I read a lot," Jake replied modestly. "History, mainly. How objects and money move through different hands over time. Sometimes the most legitimate-looking transactions have the most fascinating backstories." The conversation was a masterpiece of subtle communication. To any outside observer, we were a normal family making polite small talk with prominent donors. In reality, we were conducting a complex intelligence operation designed to intrigue the heads of a criminal empire. "We should have lunch sometime," Catherine suggested to me. "I'd love to hear more about your nonprofit experience. Perhaps you could advise us on some of our foundation's challenges." "I'd be delighted," I replied, understanding that this was the first step in what could be a years-long recruitment process. As the Castellanos moved on to greet other guests, Agent Chen's voice crackled softly through the nearly invisible earpiece I wore. "Outstanding work. You've just accomplished what normally takes months of careful positioning." "They're interested." David adjusted his cufflinks, a signal that he was about to speak. "Phase 1 complete?" "Phase 1 complete," Chen confirmed. "But remember, this is when it gets dangerous. Interested criminals are curious criminals, and curious criminals investigate." The Gallows program featured the usual speeches about the Foundation's impact, success stories of children whose lives had been changed by charitable interventions, and pleas for continued support. But I found myself studying the audience instead of listening to the speakers, cataloging faces and trying to identify which apparently respectable citizens were actually part of the Castellano network. The answer, I realized with growing horror, was probably most of them. This wasn't just a charity gala, it was a gathering of the criminal elite, a place where corruption wore evening gowns and money laundering masqueraded as philanthropy. The children being honored by the foundation were probably legitimate beneficiaries, but the money funding their programs almost certainly came from drugs, murder, and extortion. Mom? Emma whispered during a particularly emotional speech about homeless youth. Are you okay? I realized I was gripping my champagne glass so tightly my knuckles had gone white. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just processing everything. Emma nodded, with understanding far beyond her years. It's hard, isn't it? Knowing that good things can come from terrible sources. My 12-year-old daughter had just articulated the moral complexity that would haunt us for the rest of our lives. The Foundation's work was genuinely helping children, but that work was funded by organizations that destroyed other families. Every success story we'd heard tonight had been paid for with blood money. As the evening wound down, Anthony Castellano approached David again. Dr. Morrison, I hope you'll consider joining our Foundation's medical advisory board. We're always looking for talented surgeons who understand that discretion is as important as skill in certain situations. I'd be honored, David replied. Though I should mention that my schedule can be quite demanding. Emergency surgeries don't always respect normal business hours. Anthony's smile was knowing. We completely understand. Some of our most valued associates maintain very demanding schedules. Availability at unusual hours can be quite lucrative. The meaning was crystal clear. David was being recruited to provide medical services to criminals, probably treating gunshot wounds and other injuries that couldn't be reported to legitimate hospitals. I'll have my assistant send you our contact information, Anthony continued. Perhaps we could arrange a private dinner soon. There are several associates I'd love for you to meet. As we prepared to leave the gala, Emma tugged on my sleeve. Mrs. Castellano invited me to volunteer with their youth mentorship program, she said quietly. Should I accept? The request sent chills down my spine. Youth mentorship was exactly how criminal organizations identified and groomed potential recruits. They were moving faster than we'd anticipated, already targeting my daughter for cultivation. What did you tell her? I asked. That I'd need to ask permission, but I was very interested in learning more about how successful organizations operate. The drive back to our hotel was conducted in careful silence. We'd been warned that vehicles could be monitored, and our hotel room would definitely be surveilled. It wasn't until we reached the secure FBI facility in Queens that we could speak freely. They took the bait, Agent Sheen said with satisfaction. Medical Advisory Board for David, nonprofit consulting for Sarah, youth mentorship for Emma. They're moving to recruit your entire family. What about Jake? David asked. He's being assessed separately. Anthony mentioned to one of our surveillance operatives that he was impressed by the boy's understanding of complex transactions. They'll probably approach him through educational opportunities, special tutoring, exclusive prep school recommendations, academic enrichment programs. Emma sat in the corner of the briefing room, looking smaller and younger than she had at the gala. Agent Chen, how long before they expect me to do things? Illegal things? Chen's expression softened. Years, Emma. Criminal organizations invest decades in grooming recruits. They'll start with small favors, building trust and compromising your ethics gradually. You won't be asked to do anything seriously illegal until you're an adult. And by then, Jake added grimly, they'll own us completely. Just like they owned Grandpa Harold. The parallel was chilling and accurate. Harold had been recruited young, gradually compromised, and ultimately trapped in a criminal life he couldn't escape. We were deliberately walking into the same trap, hoping that foreknowledge and FBI support would allow us to avoid Harold's fate. There's been a development, Chen said, pulling out a secure tablet. While you were at the gala, our teams executed search warrants on 17 properties connected to Castellano front organizations. We found evidence of ongoing operations in 6 cities. The photographs on her screen showed warehouses full of stolen art, sophisticated money laundering equipment, and documents detailing corruption schemes involving federal judges and senators. How much damage did we do? I asked. Substantial, but not fatal. The Castellanos have been operating for over a century. They're designed to survive law enforcement raids. But we did find something interesting. Chen scrolled to a series of photographs showing file cabinets labeled with years dating back to the 1940s. Detailed records of every criminal operation, every murder, every corruption scheme. It's like they've been keeping a corporate history of their crimes. Why would they document everything? David asked. Insurance, Jake said immediately. If anyone betrays them, they have evidence to bring down everyone else. Mutually assured destruction. Exactly, Chin confirmed. And now we know where they keep their insurance files. The question is whether we can access them before they realize how deeply we've penetrated their organization. Emma studied the photographs with the analytical intensity of a trained operative. The files are organized by year and operation type. If we could access the records from the 1960s through 1980s, we'd have evidence of the murders Grandpa Harold was involved in. And the recent files would contain evidence of ongoing operations we haven't identified yet, I added. Chen nodded grimly. That's the goal. But accessing those files would require someone with trusted access to their primary facility. Someone they don't suspect. Someone like a medical advisor who might need to treat injured associates, David said. Or a non-profit consultant helping them optimize their charity front operations, I added. Or children participating in their youth development programs, Emma finished. The scope of what we were contemplating was staggering. We weren't just talking about gathering intelligence anymore, we were planning to systematically infiltrate and document the operations of one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the country. Before we proceed, Chen said seriously, you need to understand the risks. If the Castellanos discover what you're doing, they won't just kill you. They'll make examples of your entire family to discourage other potential infiltrators. What about Harold's insurance policy? David asked. The genetic encoding he mentioned? Chen's expression darkened. We still haven't identified what Harold was referring to. If he really did encode survival information in your DNA, we'd need specialized equipment to access it. Equipment that doesn't officially exist. Then we'd better not get caught, Emma said with the calm pragmatism of someone twice her age. As we finalized plans for the deep infiltration phase of our operation, I couldn't help thinking about the birthday party that had started this nightmare. Harold Whitmore's 90th birthday, where David had whispered those prophetic words, "We are leaving. Something is very, very wrong." We had left that party, but we'd never really escaped it. The wrongness that David had sensed that night had followed us across the country, transformed our identities, and turned our children into weapons against the same corruption that had nearly destroyed us. Now, as we prepared to complete Harold's work and bring down the criminal empire that had owned our family for 60 years, I realized that some battles don't end with victory or defeat. They end with transformation. Emma and Jake Whitmore had died in that parking garage 6 months ago, replaced by Amy and Justin Morrison. Sarah and David Whitmore had died too, replaced by Jennifer and Richard Morrison. The question now was whether the Morrison family could destroy the Castellano organization without becoming the very thing they'd set out to fight. 3 months later, we would have our answer, but that's a story for another day, the story of how a family's quest for justice became something far darker and more complex than simple revenge. The story of what happens when you stare too long into the abyss, and the abyss stares back. For now, it was enough to know that the nightmare that began at Harold Whitmore's birthday party was far from over. It had merely evolved into something that would define our lives for decades to come. The real question wasn't whether we could bring down the Castellanos, the real question was whether we could do it without losing our souls in the process. 3 years later, the Castellano crime family was completely dismantled. 47 indictments led to the largest organized crime prosecution in federal history. Over 300 murders were solved, dozens of corrupt officials were imprisoned, and hundreds of millions in criminal assets were seized. The Morrison family disappeared after the trials ended, their true identities known only to a handful of federal agents. Emma and Jake Morrison graduated from elite universities with full scholarships, their academic records showing no trace of their previous training in intelligence operations. Dr. Richard Morrison became one of the most respected cardiac surgeons on the West Coast. While Jennifer Morrison built a successful consulting firm specializing in nonprofit fraud prevention, they had saved countless lives and brought justice to victims spanning half a century. But late at night, when the house was quiet and the children were asleep, Sarah would sometimes catch David staring out windows with the expression of a man who would never stop looking over his shoulder, because some prices, once paid, can never be refunded, and some family secrets never truly die, they just wait for the next generation to discover them. The end. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.